Welcome to Humanizing Leadership. I'm your host, Louise H. Reed. Each week I sit down for 40 minutes and have a brilliant conversation with an expert guest where we discuss topics for next-gen leaders. On today's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Marisa Porges, known for her work on leadership, gender issues, education, and national security. She is currently the 8th head of the Baldwin School, a 130-year-old all-girls school outside of Philadelphia, renowned for academic excellence and for preparing girls to be leaders and changemakers. She also recently released a must-read book, one that I'm definitely calling a handbook for girls, and the book is called What Girls Need: How to Raise Bold, Courageous, and Resilient Women. I'm honored to have Marisa on the show today, and we're calling the show Girls Today, Leaders Tomorrow. And we talk about how we need to think and act differently in preparing our girls for leadership. Listen in, enjoy the show, and make sure you subscribe to my email list at louisehreed.com to get the show notes and quotes sent directly to your inbox. And with that, on to the show. Marisa Porges, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time, since I've been fortunate enough to get my hands on your amazing book, which I like to call a guidebook, called What Girls Need: How to Raise Bold, Courageous, and Resilient Women. So thanks for writing this.
Well, thank you for enjoying the stories and the research and the ideas. I hope it gives everyone who has any girl or woman in their life. It was a personal passion project, so it's fun to talk about it now.
And, you know, it's clear that it's a passion project, as well as a work of much heavy mental labor as well, based on the research. It comes through in how you've written it. What I'd like to do maybe is just kick off the show by sharing some stats, which you highlight. They're littered throughout the book, and they're also, you mentioned them on your website. And they highlight why this is such an important conversation to be having. And so I wanted to share this at the outset of the show, so we can all of us can be on the same sort of foundation in place when we start through the conversation. So I have a handful of stats here. Women still make on average 81 cents for every dollar that a man makes, and the wage gap is even wider for women of color. Over a lifetime, wage gaps lead to significant amounts of lost earnings for women. It will take 108 years. I will repeat, 108 years, ouch, to close the gender gap, according to pre-COVID research. Sadly, the pandemic has worsened the gender gap in many countries. And there are many more stats, but I'll end with this one for now. Only 7.4% of CEOs at Fortune 500 companies are female, and that is an all-time high. So with stats like that, it's hard to know really where to start because it paints a bleak picture. But what I love through your approach, through your research, and through your strategies and what you share in the book, you give us a lot of hope and a lot of tactical actions that we can take to move the needle. So maybe you could share with us start by sharing a little bit about your background, your own leadership journey, and how that led you to the book.
Sure. Well, I know you start with those stats and you think, my goodness, are we in 2021? What's going on? Because we think, we look around and we see, female leaders. We think we've, come so far. We have a female vice president. And the system has changed, but we're just not there yet. And so I think being honest with ourselves about that, so that we can talk candidly about the barriers that face, women every day, no matter where you're at, personally and professionally, but that are still going to be there for our children, our next generation, so that we can prepare them for what's likely going to be the reality when they're out in the working world, even in 10 or 20 years, is a great place to start. And then share personal stories about, well, what could we do better, or what worked, and things like that. And that's where my personal story comes in, right? I had the good fortune of following my own adventure, choose my own adventure career. I flew jets for the Navy off of aircraft carriers because that was my childhood dream. I then pivoted and handled counterterrorism strategy and work for the government, and traveled to the Middle East and Afghanistan as, on my own, doing research in Yemen, interviewing terrorists and Al-Qaeda, former Al-Qaeda members, and and crazy things like that. The stories that I didn't tell my mom until I came home and then let her know where I was, right? And ended up working at the White House in the Obama administration, right? Sort of following my dreams to that spot. And then now found myself pulled in a totally different direction where I run a school. I run a school for girls who are in a pre-kindergarten through grade 12. So, age 4 years old till just before college, and an all girls school where our mission is to prepare, young women to be leaders and change makers. And so I've spent the past few years like really taking a close look at my own journey and thinking, like what worked and what just didn't. What are those moments where I fell flat on my face because maybe it was the system that wasn't set up for a woman to succeed in largely male dominated environments. But is there something that I could have done differently had I been prepared to speak up, not just earn a seat at the table, but then speak up when I was there, not just, get the job offer, but actually negotiate for my salary? Or how do I leverage certain skills that are like actually easier, statistically speaking, research shows for women, like empathetic communication skills, right? We know that by research, it's nurtured earlier on for young girls. And these are things that we can help be their advantage no matter where they head. So the book covers all of this. And it was inspired by that story I just told you of my own career, but then largely by the girls I see every day here at school and the questions they're asking about, the vision of their future and want to make sure they can get there. So that's the short, the almost short version of it.
It was a short version. And I love hearing you share it when I've read it. So just hearing it shared out of your own mouth versus just your own words written in the book is really exciting to hear. So one of the things that you just mentioned is about the importance of preparing our girls and for the reality that it isn't going to be the future that we're wanting to create for ourselves 100 and 200 years from now, right? When they get to the workplace, many of these barriers are still going to exist. So I love that about being honest with the reality. Mm-hmm. So you talk about our girls needing special or different skills to succeed in the world. And we know through research as well that girls behaving in the same way as boys doesn't have the same impact. So what are these quote unquote different skills and what happens? Well, I guess we know what happens. We don't teach it. Yeah. So just talk to us about those different skills and why it's so important to teach these to our young girls.
Well, and I think this is where to your point, like it's not about girls being more like boys or women being more like men. Because I think these are things that we can be learning and thinking about at any stage in life. So for the listeners who don't have daughters or granddaughters or nieces in their lives, it's for us too, right? I think as women or as leaders or if you have women on your team, it's a recognition that when we take on that reality we just talked about, that harsh reality, we need a certain tools in our toolkit to do it effectively and be our best selves. For one great example is this idea of how we use our voice, right? How we speak up and to be effectively heard, whether it's because women get interrupted more than men, at the Supreme Court or at a tech company or just at a normal business operation, women are often, no, actually not often, always interrupted more than a male peer might be. Or whether it's the fact that women typically, when they might earn a seat at the table, have the imposter syndrome or perfectionism or other things sort of hold us back from speaking up when we're there. And I can speak to that firsthand, right? That story, yes, it sounds like, oh my goodness, like I, was able to grab my golden ring and sort of knock it out of the park. And then I finally made it to the West Wing, right? Like the pinnacle of my career to that point, had my first meeting with the president of the United States, the leader of the free world, that moment you wait for. And I sat in the meeting with President Obama across from the Oval Office in the Roosevelt Room, sort of where you have the conferences of like 10 or 12 people around the table from him. And in the course of an hour talking about national security, foreign policy, Al-Qaeda, the things that had been my, expertise and my issue for a number of years, I didn't say a word the entire time. I left the meeting and looked back and realized, like, what had I just done? I had, each time it would have been my time to either comment or ask a question or follow up. I thought, I'll let my colleague take it. It's his turn. Oh, I'll take the next one. I'll take my chance. And I realized that, the cliche cat got your tongue is what happened to me who, I thought I was so empowered and so ready to knock it out of the park. And I don't want that to happen to any of our, any of the girls at my school or any of the women I have, and, I know in my personal and professional life. And I think it happens a lot more often than we admit. I talk to a lot of female friends and we say, yeah, I've had that moment where I had my big meeting or my big chance and I didn't say what I wanted to say, or I paused too long and let a guy speak for me. Or maybe I had a big idea and no one heard it. And then the guy sitting next to me said the same thing and suddenly he got credit for it, all those moments. And I think there are concrete ways and things and skills that we can teach ourselves as women or teach the young women in our lives to help practice the art of speaking up, help practice the art of asking, persuading, practice the art of negotiating so that when we're in those moments, we're just, personally comfortable and able to do it as best we can.
I really appreciated that story in the book and you sharing it again here. I imagine it's not an easy experience to have been through. So no doubt it's not an easy experience to be sharing with everyone who's willing to listen. But
I hate telling the story. So thank you for, it's one of those moments. People are like, really? That's what happened? I'm like, yeah, actually. So thank you for recognizing that.
Right?
But yeah.
Right. It's so valuable because it makes you so relatable. It's like, oh my gosh, okay, so she's been there. She's not just someone who's writing a book and doing the research and doing all the good things and saying it from, this big shiny corner office. It's like, no, I had to fall as well to get to learn these lessons along the way. So you talked about and mentioned the practice of practicing the art of speaking up, practicing the art of negotiating. So these are some of the skills that you reference in the book. How does one what's an example of maybe how we can help our girls practice the art of speaking up? And I love some of the examples that you share in the book, but maybe I can just
well, I think this is where I'm an advocate for breaking things down into small practical steps that you can do every day or here and there. It doesn't have to be always, but so that it becomes akin to muscle memory, right? In the same way that, you're not going to serve good at tennis or sort of hit good free throws on the basketball court unless you just practice it over and over again and it becomes like muscle memory. I actually think that speaking up, negotiating, advocating, effectively asking, those are all skills that we need our girls to practice in little ways from a young age so that it becomes like muscle memory. And for us as adults too, right? If we think about how and when we can speak up in small, safe ways, it becomes easier and easier to then rely on that memory when you're in the more nervous moments where it's your boss, a big meeting, or the leader of the free world. So what does that look like for girls, in particular, kids? This is where we forget that when you're a kid, speaking up at a restaurant, asking the waiter, ordering the food for the whole family when you're next at a restaurant when we get out of the pandemic, that's actually for a young kid, nerve-wracking. Mm-hmm. But of course it's safe. When we don't think about it now, you're like, no, but it's safe. No one's going to bite their head off. And if they, do a bad job, it doesn't really matter because you'll either, get the wrong pizza toppings or you'll be able to correct it when you hear it's wrong. But it's actually, an example, a practical, moment that one of my students shared with me, a student who I had seen speak up and stand her ground and in one of the most difficult moments that a young girl could face, she'd actually been sexually harassed, in a public space. And, as a teenager, she was barely in her junior year of high school. And she had the wherewithal, but not just the wherewithal, the skill set to not just get out safely and do what she needed to protect herself, but then when she was safe, to sit down and write a thoughtful, coherent, fully just so mature, a note to the leader of it was a school, it was a college where she'd been harassed openly, in a public space by two employees of the school. And she wrote the middle-aged white man in charge, a dear sir, I want to let you know what happened, and concluded it by saying, if you don't have sexual harassment training, you probably should start. And, I'd love to talk to you about it. And 36 hours later, she was in his office with the head of security and the director of HR explaining exactly what happened. And that is just a moment where I was both aghast that it happened and so proud that this young woman knew what she had to do, to have her voice heard. And not least because these moments aren't often reported. And, by college age students, not just by teenagers in high school. Anyway, to get back to what made the biggest difference, when I asked her, about it, and we were talking about it after the fact, and I said, well, how did you get so good at this act of speaking up? We sort of dug into it a bit, and she started telling stories, and she remembered when she was about 10 years old, and her dad, in this instance, used to make her order pizza when they called for takeout. And she can remember she hated it. She said, he didn't make my brother do it, didn't make my mom, but made me every time. I would have to practice. I'd have to get on the phone. He would coach me through it. And then I would have to order pizza for the family every single time we ordered takeout. And she got used to it. And she says she still doesn't like it. It's not her thing. She doesn't want to have to speak up for everyone all the time. But when she needs to, she can. It's just a muscle memory. So here's where the idea is: find little moments. The next time you're at the amusement park, who's going to ask for directions? The next time you're at a museum, who's, filling out the comment card, but then saying the comments to the docent or whatever, right? The hotel, the moment where we can help our kids in safe ways where we're with them, speak out and practice the muscle that you need to grow to speak your mind. It's incredibly impactful, incredibly empowering, particularly for girls who don't do it often.
I love that story. And I also, my takeaway here, as I was reading the book and shared with you before we started the show, was about what are the takeaways then for women in the workplace now? Because, and for those who lead women, whether we are women ourselves, whether we're a male leading women, how do we, if we haven't learned these skills when we are young, as you're so greatly, outlining in this, what I'm calling guidebook, what can we do? And even just hearing that story that you just shared now, I thought we can still start doing those things now. Start looking for those little moments to practice where we can speak out, in moments that are safe, in moments that might be so easy it's hard to fail. And even if we do fail, it doesn't matter. The impact is low, or there's no impact.
Yep. Well, and I think this is where I love trying to see how we can use similar advice at any stage in life. And so, this is where for women I mentor who are early stage in their career, or, the women I manage on my team at school or other places I've worked, I think about the same advice and just sort of tweak it a bit for different ages or stages in our career, right? This is where when you're at a meeting, I've done this for me in moments where I'm starting anew and I'm realizing that I've forgotten the muscle memory and I'm nervous. I actually make a game of it. I tell myself I'm going to speak twice in that meeting, and I keep a little scorecard. I mean, more than once, because once doesn't seem like too much, and 3 seems like a lot in an hour-long meeting, but 2 times seems like a reasonable goal to shoot for. And it's just about that art of the practice. In some ways, it almost doesn't matter what you say, although you always want to, say the smart thing or feel like you're eloquent. But the act of speaking is just something we need to practice. And so for those, when I have, women on my team who I see or I think may need the practice, or it's something we're working on with them together, I find those opportunities for them. I build it into meetings so that they have to speak up, even if it's just, sharing out something that we've worked on together, or taking a moment and pausing and reflecting on your work for the past week. I build it into the actual meeting so that everyone is continually sort of testing and strengthening that muscle, so that when we're out in a different place where it's not as safe because it's not an internal team meeting or something like that, they can rely on the same stuff we've been doing, during a regular work week.
It's amazing. And I think it's really neat to even consider being on this kind of journey, this learning journey with your girls. I have 4 boys. So I certainly talk to my boys about the challenges that girls and women experience, because I think it's important that this is not a girl's problem. This is a human problem.
Correct.
But their challenges are obviously very different, right? They're hearing the stories versus experiencing the challenges. But for those listening who are giving some of these things a go, and these tips and strategies that Marisa is sharing, how fun would it be if you're teaching your girl and you're practicing at the same time as them, and you can kind of share your learning journey together?
It's so powerful. And it's actually something that research shows, it has more impact than we even realize with our kids, but particularly with girls, sharing these personal stories. And now is a great opportunity because, given the pandemic, we're all either working remotely at home, seeing a little more of each other than maybe even we want to, but definitely having more dinners with our kids than ever before. And sharing like our own journey, particularly in the moments of failure, is incredibly, incredibly impactful. They've shown that it has more impact when we hear about those lessons of failure with adults. And we've also seen that, with young women in particular, when they hear about it in the real world, they remember it in a different way. And so this is where the next time, you can talk about what happens in a meeting that maybe didn't go well, or maybe it's just something you're trying yourself. Try to share that out with your daughter or your niece or whomever is around the dinner table, your son too, because they need to hear it as well. These are equally applicable to boys and girls. Just I have girls on my mind most days, so that's where this conversation's at. But sure, going through it with them both makes them realize that it's something okay to deal with in some ways. It sort of normalizes this journey for kids in a really impactful and powerful way, particularly for girls who, we often see fight against perfectionism, think that they have to be perfect, that you can't have this journey, you can't have these struggles because that's not okay. Of course it's okay, right? We're all in the midst of it throughout life. And so hearing that from their moms, from people they respect, from mentors or managers in their life is really impactful.
Love that. One of the things that you've mentioned as well is about the practicing the art of negotiating. Having worked in HR for more than 20 years now, I've read the research, but I also experience how crappy many women are at negotiating, and B, how many women compared to men actually don't negotiate, whether it's for promotion, whether it's for a salary increase, whether it's for a higher salary at time of hire. Talk to me a little bit about the research and what we're doing, what we can do with our girls.
This one I also learned firsthand. You're really going to the heart of all those stories, aren't you, Lucy? I mean, it wasn't just once, but more than once when I turned to the male peers in my workplace, and somehow conversations about title or salary or even benefits. One time I realized that I wasn't getting the same benefits that the men at my workplace were, because I didn't know I was supposed to ask for them, and no one was going to give them to me. Of course they weren't. Like, who knew? It seems crazy now I think about it, but it just hadn't been a skill that anyone had talked about with me when I was young. And so it's something that I now teach in my leadership class for the girls in my school here. We talk about it, say, okay, when you get out there, you need to negotiate. You need to try. The only thing they can say is no. But the art of asking is something you need to practice, and it's critical. Because as you quoted early on from statistics, whether it's the fact that even women leaving an MBA program, are statistically speaking, likely to earn $8,000 less after leaving an MBA program, where the idea is they're given these skills, and they, on average, learn $8,000 less than a man in their first post-grad school job. And then, or you compound it about the earnings lost, the opportunities lost over the course of a lifetime for career promotions or opportunities for flexible work, and, all these ways that women are being left out systemically. So one is, what do we do about it? We talk to our girls and we say, yep, nope, whether it's that first job at the pizza parlor or the summer camp, right? It's not about hardball negotiating, but it's about asking, is there any room for the salary negotiating? Is that, standard, or is there some place to move on that? Are those the hours, or is there something else that can be done? Like, what else comes with this? Just that ask, early jobs will likely answer will be like, nope, there's no ask room. There's no room there. But by asking the question, it encourages our girls to realize that at every step along the way, they need to ask for what they want and what they deserve. A more, almost daily practical way we can help, both boys and girls, but again, specifically our girls, practice this is the next time they want something, almost anything, make them practice asking for it, even if you know what the outcome is. It could be, it doesn't have to be any, thing that's expensive. It could literally be a sleepover or a trip to the amusement park or something special that's different, extended curfew on a weeknight. Again, this is something that I borrowed from the girls at my school. I had two girls walk into my room, my office rather, the head of school, the principal of the principals, and they asked me for something kind of outlandish, crazy. They wanted to start a cookie making business at school, and for a lot of reasons, it wasn't going to work. Fine. But I was so impressed with how they asked for what they wanted that after they got done their pitch, I said, hey, okay, let's, step aside for a second. How did you guys learn to do this? What was it that made you so good at this? And they said that, one of them said that their parents made them pitch for almost like not everything, but lots of things. And they actually pulled up a PowerPoint that they did when they wanted a slumber party. And it was complete with pictures of the cupcakes they wanted to make and what movies they were going to watch and sort of the schedule of the day if they got a slumber party on a Thursday night. I have no idea what the parents said. I do know, however, that they, in that moment, encouraged the girl to ask and be persuasive and figure out what worked for her personally in the art of negotiating in a way that, she was barely in middle school at that time, and she will remember that forevermore. I also have to say, for parents out there always looking for, what these days we can give our kids to do that will sort of distract them for long enough that we can get more work done. It's a great idea. They want something, you might know the answer, but say, come back in 30 minutes and pitch me for it, right? It has all these, double benefits for parents and for kids. And it's a great way to get our girls to practice that muscle memory of asking and negotiating in a powerful way.
So awesome. I also just love when I hear stories, which you've shared many, of how our kids in our lives, whether it's the students, our own children, how they teach us so much. Right. So through the stories that you have shared about your students, how those have brought home some of the messages and learnings that you've experienced as well throughout your life. The pitch does work, by the way, friends, because one of my boys was asking for a cat for the longest time. I'm not a cat person. So thankfully, it's not often I say, thankfully, I have an ex-husband, but in this situation, I'm thankful that I had an ex-husband, because I told my child, told Cameron, I said, pitch it, put a PowerPoint together, do some research, and think about how you can sell dad on getting a cat. It didn't work. But to your point, great. It was great. It took a lot of time. He had, research skills, asking. We talk about practicing the art. You said the ask, speaking up, and negotiating. So I love that suggestion, and thanks for reminding me of that nice memory that was buried a little bit deeper. So I'm thinking now, with my corporate hat on here, I'm thinking and wondering, with all of the work that organizations are embarking on to support and create greater gender equity in our workplaces today, and recognizing that it's going to be 108 plus years before we get there, are organizations looking too short term? Like, we're looking to help the women in our workplace, which I think we have to do. Okay, we can't. I'm not an advocate for stopping those things, but is there an and here? How does industry need to get involved in helping bridge this gap? Talk to me about how we actually move the needle more.
Yeah, and this is the systemic side, right? So the book is largely focused on practical skills and advice that we can implement in our own lives and for our own people at any stage of life. But yeah, there's a whole systemic part of the story too. And I don't have the answer, but I'll sort of the few things that come to mind, because I've been thinking about it a lot with in regards to the pandemic, right? These conversations about the pandemic leaving women behind, or sort of forcing women in a different spot than we were when it started, which was 108 years behind. And even the statistics that in September alone, 4 times as many women opted out of the workforce than men. That's crazy. 800,000 women stepped aside because the pandemic had been going on for almost longer than 6 months, and we just, some of us broke. I don't blame you. It's impossible. And so what does that mean systemically, right? What does that mean at the macro level? I think this is where the conversations about, flexible work, maternity leave, like how we're supporting, women, mothers, women at different stages of life, the idea of not just off ramps, but on ramps. I had a really interesting conversation with a colleague in the military, or sort of a colleague, in my former life in the military, and then we had a whole conversation about why is it that so many of the women we know who would right now be stepping into the role of colonels or generals or admirals, that senior leader role, say, you know what, I know I could do it and I'd be great, but I'm done, I'm out, because now is my chance to be with family, or now is my chance to do other things. How do we keep those women who are the leaders that we need? And I think I think we've seen a lot of ideas play out over the past year in terms of, flexible work systems and this idea of working different places, working remotely, juggling schedules, thinking differently about what the daily or weekly workday looks like so that we can accommodate the realities that a lot of women face. I have to say, this came to me personally when I became a mom, which was relatively recently. Ironically, I have a son. So despite all my daily, I have 600 girls at my school who are my girls, my kids in so many ways, but my own kid is a boy. So the school and the book, I don't know, that's a little off brand. And yet, when I became a mom about 18 months ago, everyone said it would change you, and it's so cliche, and it does. But there's also the practical way it changes, like how I thought about my day. I'm still, a hard charging CEO equivalent for the organization I lead, and that wasn't going to change. And I still want to be as hard charging as ever. But I had to think about my day differently, just because I needed to make sure that like the kid was going to be fed, and my husband had to work, and we juggled different things, and that's totally just life. But I think having the system, not just build a pipeline for women to get in or figure out like sort of what that looks like, but then think, well, what happens when we're there? How do we make sure that throughout the life cycle of a woman's career, again, so I don't have the answer, but those are the things I've been thinking about and trying to figure out what that means on a macro level for everyone.
And I appreciate what you share, both the very practical suggestions and the questions to consider, and the recognition that you don't have the answer. No one person does, I don't believe, right? It is going to take a community of people, and it's going to take trial and error. And I am hopeful that we are going to move the needle, and that despite COVID's terrible impact that clearly it's had on so many people's lives, that there is going to be some good that comes from it. And I hope these are some of the lessons that we gain. One of the stories and experiences that come to mind for me, and this, we're getting close to the top of I was going to say the top of the hour, but the end of our show, but I really want to talk to this concept of, or something you mentioned in the book, about seemingly small things can have a big difference in how our next generation imagine their future. The story that for me stands out as small things but big impact. I was at work. I was working in a local utility at the time, and I headed up the corporate diversity and inclusion division. And we had no female power line maintainers. It's quite common that women are not in that line of work, but it was something that we were actively trying to change. However, when I went into the garage to have a chat with the hiring manager, there were two things that immediately became clear. One was an inappropriate picture that was posted on the bulletin board. And then secondly was that there was no female washroom. There was only a male washroom. And so I went to the executives and said, I just noticed these two things. I think if we are serious about trying to change how our ability to attract and hire, and our staff actually see that we're serious about bringing women on board, these things might need to change. And the response was, when we hire a woman, we'll change those things at that time. And so the story came to me when I was reading that piece in your book about those seemingly small things that make a big difference in how our next generation imagine the future. So talk to us a little bit more about those, how you came to learn these little things. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, and so it's, my God, that story it's so fantastic. And I'll share my own very similar but different version of that story in a second, but I'll answer your question and then we'll get there. The small things, again, I mean, I learned it from the girls. I started, when I was interviewing them for the book, or sort of hearing them talk during, classes I was teaching on leadership, small things that they would say that they had heard, and that had seeped into their identity and sort of how they thought about themselves in the world. It would be the moment then, and this again, taking from one of the students, that her dad mentioned how good she was at writing when she was really young in elementary school. And, it stuck with her because he was very good at writing. That was part of what he did for work and for his job. And, and then she realized that she should do it more. And then she leaned into it, and then it became her thing. And so literally she mentioned it when she came back from college, and here she is super, early stages, but successful, going for her, going after it, right? Like being her best self. And the thing when I said, well, why do you think you're doing such a good job and that you knew to go for that top level course when you're just still a freshman and yada, yada. And she said, I can remember when my dad said something, keyed on me. And, that stuff matters. And, doesn't mean we have to be perfect and say the right thing all the time. That's certainly not about it. But to find little moments where we reinforce what we know to be needed and important for girls in particular, the art of speaking up, the idea that they want to be heard and not just get a seat at the table, but, speak up when they're there, the idea that we embrace them being competitive in a healthy way, or that we want them to, collaborate and all these other things I speak about in the book. I think small moments where we reinforce that as important are critical. And then the other piece of it, and you spoke to it in your fantastic story, was the signals we send in other ways of not just talking about inclusivity or talking about the importance of having women, but making it a welcome environment for them. And my version of that was, so many of the times that I was in the national security sphere or in the military, and just like everywhere you turn, they changed the laws. Women could then fly in combat. Yeah, they were sort of like, integrating the squadron so women could be there, but I still had to sign a waiver saying that, the equipment wasn't built for me. And so if it didn't work, I couldn't sue the Department of Defense because, I was just too small and too light, because the average woman is statistically speaking much smaller and lighter than a man.
And wait a second. I think we're talking about the ejection seat here, right?
Yes.
Let's be clear. Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to
So sorry. Yes. It's the ejection seat.
We're not talking about a small, I just had to interject that because, friends, we're not talking about like a small piece of equipment that might just make you feel uncomfortable in your uniform, which still isn't appropriate. We're talking the ejection seat here. Sorry, Marisa, carry on, please.
No, but it's true. But there's so many moments of that you think about. There's actually been done research that so many things have been historically created with the average man in mind that we don't even realize, how it might be it holding women back or inhibiting us in a common day, right? The fact that women, statistically speaking, are 47% more likely to be injured in a car crash because I hope they've changed this by now. I'll say it's a couple of years old, but not that year old, the data, because cars were built and engineered and the safety equipment was designed with men in mind. And so, it wasn't built for our body shapes, types, and weights. The same reason that we're often, I know I'm cold whenever I've been in like a big office building. I worked for the federal government for many years. I always had to have a sweater stuck in my drawer because I was always super cold. It's actually because historically speaking, those old buildings the temperature was set with men in mind. Their metabolic rates mean their body temperatures run slightly differently and we're uncomfortable when they're comfortable. Now, those things may take lots to change, but, seeing how you're creating systems where we keep women in mind, particularly when we want women to be there, yes, that's part of the systemic change. I think that will make, hopefully make a difference moving forward. Mm-hmm. Another crazy one, they didn't let women wear pants on the floor of Congress until the 90s.
No.
I know. Sorry. All these things. And we're like, no wonder why there still is only, 26% of women, an elected officials, because it wasn't a place where, it was set up for women for decades, centuries.
So we need to have a curious mind. We need to be looking at things with a really, really curious mind. I know that there's so much goodness and so much conversation we could continue to have about cultivating our girls' competitive spirit, importance of adaptability and collaborative problem-solving skills, which are those other 21st century skills that you refer to in your book. We're going to have to save that either for another day, or friends, you're going to have to grab a copy of the book, which you'll find the link in the show notes. But if there was only one message or action that you'd like listeners to take away from this show today, what would it be?
It'd be about the importance of finding small moments to help our girls and ourselves or any woman in your life practice the things that will make her most empowered self. So keep it in mind for the women on your team, the women you work with, or the young women in your life.
I love that. And with that, Marisa, a huge thank you for sharing your time with me, for sharing your expertise and sharing this book with the world.
Thank you for having me. It's been a blast and it was super fun. So it was wonderful to be here.
Wonderful. Thanks, Marisa. You've been listening to Humanizing Leadership with Louise H. Reed, along with today's guest, Marisa Porges. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you want to help get the word out on how we humanize leadership, please rate the podcast, leave a review, and tell your friends that they can subscribe to Humanizing Leadership on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or Stitcher. And if you like what you heard today, which I know you did, you have to sign up for a free weekly newsletter where you'll get inspiration and information on how to level up in your own leadership. You can sign up for that at louisehreed.com. Otherwise, I always like to hear from you. You can email me directly at louisehreed.com or simply connect with me on LinkedIn. Finally, podcast theme music is from Bensound, so thank you to them. And also much gratitude to Contact Talk Radio Network and my podcast production team, Cameron Steele and Jay Andrews. Thanks again for listening to today's show, and I'll chat with you again next Tuesday. Bye, friends.